Hey, WokeNFree Nation. Newsly is an audio app for iOS and Android. It picks up web articles about the most trending topics on the web at any given moment and reads them to you in a natural human voice.
For the first time in the history of the internet, the entire web becomes listenable. Browse articles from topics you choose and start playing. Stop scrolling, start listening.
You can follow any topic as specific as you like, from sports, science to Bitcoin, or even one of your favorite celebrities. It will find you the latest articles and read them to you aloud.
And they have podcasts as well. Explore trending podcasts from over 50 countries. Our podcast, WokeNFree, is there too.
Now let's get into the episode. Hi, it's Natasha.
And Khalil.
And we are the co-hosts of WokeNFree. Thank you for tuning in to our 273rd episode of WokeNFree. If you've been tuning in every week for WokeNFree Wednesday, you know that WokeNFree is all about being real and honest with each other and you. We talk about everything and anything important to us, you, the world, and nothing is off the table. This week, we are having a really interesting conversation around use of language and how it affects intimacy with Dr. LaShonda Green. But before we dive deep into that conversation, a couple of things to go over. First, have you gone to WokeNFree.com not only to listen to this episode, but through the downloaded Podbean app, you're able to put in your comments, and you definitely will have things to say on this episode. So if you haven't done that, please do that immediately. Now, if you listen to podcasts on a device where you can't put on another app like the Podbean app, then best way to support the show is to go to WokeNFree.com, go on the Listen tab, and then pick your platform of choice where you want to follow and subscribe to the show at. So we're on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Google Play. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Pandora, Samsung Podcasts. Like, we're everywhere. It's amazing. So definitely lots of different areas for you to support us at. Even on WokeNFree.com on the top, if you click subscribe to follow the show through the Podbean app, that would be super, super helpful. And on social, you can always holler and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Pinterest, and LinkedIn at WokeNFree. And then if you would like to, spend 90 seconds reviewing the show, we wouldn't mind a couple more 5-star ratings. Thank you very much. So you can rate the show and share how the show is feeding into your life by going to WokeNFree.com, go on the Listen tab, and then pick your platform of choice where you're going to review the show at. Now, before we start talking with Dr. LaShonda Green, let's share a little bit about who she is. So she's a licensed clinical psychologist who has specialties with a lot of different practice areas. So we will put this in the episode notes because it is just, she is quite a range of topics that she deals with. So anything from anxiety, depression, trauma, suicidal ideation, marriage, couple and family therapy, dealing with pregnancy, prenatal and postpartum, peer relationships, adolescent issues, teen violence, parenting, self-esteem, domestic violence and abuse, bipolar disorder, substance abuse, emotional disturbance, medication management, racial identity, dual diagnosis, sexual abuse, coping skills, weight loss, self-harm, college and career counseling, and more. So when we say she has quite a range of expertise, wow. She has quite a range of expertise. And definitely if you want to learn more about her and her bio and her links and ways that you can get in touch with Dr. LaShonda Green, best way to do that is go to WokeNFree.com. In this episode, you'll see more information about her and how you can get in touch with her. So without further ado, let's jump into the conversation with Dr. LaShonda Green.
But before we get into the topic at hand, what we do on our podcast is we like to share a little bit about ourselves. So we're going to ask a question that all of us will ask, and I guess you can go first and give an answer if you'd like. So the question this week is, would you rather name your child after a family member or someone who inspires you?
If I had to choose between those two, I would choose someone who inspires me.
Oh, interesting. Why?
Well, not all family members are inspirational.
I Yes, I second that. I would say that I personally would choose a person who inspires me. Because I think sometimes with family, people get a little territorial. And so if you choose one family member, another family member might take offense or feel slighted. And so it kind of opens Pandora's box. So I agree. An inspirational figure who you're not related to is more likely to just be mutually accepted by all.
I agree,
Okay.
especially if it's like not a traditional thing. It's not common. It's not a traditional thing that people in my family do. So
Okay, and Khalil?
And so when I think about this question, I would not choose family member either. But when I think about somebody who inspires me, I would actually go in terms of somebody that's like easily recognizable by everybody. So I would go with that just because everybody would recognize the name if I used it. So for
SEO
example,
purposes.
like Michael Jordan, everybody knows who that is.
Nice.
So if I name my child after him, I'm just going on the perspective that everybody will know that name that I use, even though it's not like necessarily the most inspiring person. I'm just going by who is likely to be known by everybody if I use that name.
So Jesus comes in a close second.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, just somebody that's known the world over. That's how I would think of it.
How lovely.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's time to dive into the topic now. So let's get into it. When we think about the use of language, how does it affect intimacy?
Well, it's important to understand, and this seems to be very sort of common sense, right? When I explain it, you'd be like, oh, yes, it makes sense. So humans are the only species who actually use language to build rapport or relationships, right? Other animals, sea creatures, animals of the wild, they don't have language, right? The way that they form bonds is a lot of the times is by modeling and sounds, right? They have ritualistic behaviors, they have sounds, but the thing that separates us from, other animals is our ability to reason, and ergo, that's where language comes into play. And so it is very important for humans, especially, to choose their words carefully and to develop a healthy awareness around their word choices and word usage for the purpose of developing relationships. It does matter your cadence, your tonality, your vocabulary, your pitch, your rhythm, your rate, your speed. All of that is critically important when you're forming relationships with people, because that's how we introduce ourselves. That's how we build connections. That's how we maintain connections. That's how we receive feedback. That's how we give feedback. We get our needs met through verbal interactions.
Love that. Okay. And then when you take that that kind of framework, and then you kind of put a spotlight within like the Black community, because all of us together speaking are part of that community. What would be some things in particular as a doctor that maybe you've seen, or things that you feel like within our community that we need to be thinking about within language choice, and whether it's like intimacy between parent and child, or even on a romantic level?
Well, research has shown comparatively when it comes to like white people, there has been a study, the last that I know of it, which indicates that people of color, Black people, are high context people. So we put less emphasis actually on the articulation and the word choice and the word usage, and more emphasis on the context. So we are heavy on the context. We're heavy on the situation. We're heavy on the circumstance, where white people are heavy verbally and less on context. So that's an important distinction. So I would say for us, we don't use language enough. It's not a good or bad thing, right? It's not right or wrong. It's just difference, right? And there's nothing wrong. Some difference does not imply inferiority or superiority. It just happens to be different. So as a group of people, Black people, we tend to rely heavily on the context and not as much on being verbal. And I think we need to improve on being verbal.
Now, is that just for Black people that speak English, or does that count for Blacks that speak other languages like Swahili or Yoruba or anything else? Or what is that? Does that apply to all?
That study was based on Americans.
Okay. Okay. Wow.
That's interesting. Okay.
Black Americans. Mm-hmm.
All right. What are language techniques to help improve people who want to have less intimacy issues?
Well, it is important to use the correct words. For instance, I'm trying to think of something off the top of my head, but we use a lot of colloquialisms and euphemisms in Black culture, and sometimes it's helpful and sometimes it's not. Sometimes you do need to speak very clearly and very concisely and almost academic, especially when it comes to hot button topics like sex, betrayal, anything related to emotions, sensitive issues. In those instances where you're talking about hot button topics that can be very triggering, you want to lean on language that's more academic in nature because it's neutral. When you lean into conversations that are emotionally charged, and on top of that, you are leading with emotionally charged language, you are adding fuel to the fire.
Interesting. And so how do you, sorry, go ahead.
So you just want to be mindful that you almost want to sound a little bit more kind of school-like. You want to come across as being a little academic and in nature, because when it comes to having difficult conversations, it's so very easy to get distracted by someone's word choice and miss the message.
Interesting.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And so when you see kind of like improper or lack of well articulation and it creating an intimacy breakdown, I'd love for you to break that down, like just for folks listening who may not understand. So if a person isn't spelling something out, is it that then they're going to have more likely relationships where there's a lack of trust? Or is it that like if the person isn't the best at communication, then people won't relate as well? And so that's where the intimacy issues, like, could you talk about like where the deficiency in language and then the types of intimacy issues that can result?
Right. So when there's poor communication or lack of effective communication, right, then I won't know what it is your needs are. I don't know what they are. It is not up to your partner to guess what your needs are. That's blackmail. That's manipulation. It is not. It is up to you as an adult to clearly state and articulate your needs so that the other person can meet them. In order for your partner to meet your needs, whether it be more sex, more affection, more quality time, more acts of service, that is something that needs to be articulated from the person who has the need. The holder of the need bears the responsibility for communicating it.
I totally agree with that. And follow-up question would be, how do we start to put these healthy practices in place? Because, I'm sure as a doctor, you've seen people who come from a myriad of different backgrounds. And, I could speak to my background, which was that, I grew up in a household where my mother was the traditional mom who she was working, she was going to school. So she's a very unique person, but she was very traditional in the idea that she never fully got across how she was feeling emotionally. And my dad assumed that she was okay and assumed that she agreed with certain behaviors or practices. And that wasn't, say, the case. And so that was what I saw modeled. And Khalil knows this and WokeNFree Nation knows this. I have no problem sharing how I feel. But that was a behavior that I saw kind of shown to me through content, not through how I grew up. So I liked that perspective. And so I decided to take that on and mirror that in my own choices. And sometimes still it can be a little bit hard, but how do we teach, especially young people, the importance of sharing how they feel? Like you said, that like people can't be expected to know how you feel. So what are some techniques to help people train and share with their children, like the proper way to be what effective communication really looks like and the benefit of that?
Well, first things first, death to the silent treatment, right? The silent treatment is intimacy killer and relationship killer number one. Regardless if it's a platonic or romantic relationship, sibling, parental, the silent treatment is definitely detrimental. Nothing effective comes from the silent treatment. That's different from going to your corner to take a deep breath. But weaponizing silence as a form of punishment is so abusive, right? We often want to focus on people who use very aggressive and inflammatory language, defamatory language. I hope I said that right. Offensive language, because it's really clear. But the first thing you should do coming together when it, relates to intimacy is decide not to use silence as a weapon. Being silent and withholding of being silent and shutting down is not an option. And people have become masters, particularly, I see it on Instagram all the time. They have my cutoff game. There's nothing strong. There's nothing admirable about being to cut people off. That's not a strength. And people who use that as a I'm strong card, I would be very leery of, okay? Because that's a form of cowardice. Because if you cannot sit with a partner who you've been intimate with, or who you'd like to have a future with, or who you've had this past with, if you two people can come together and reason together as adults about their emotions and about what ails them, that's the larger problem. But having a strong cutoff game is a sign of someone who's unhealthy.
So would you argue that it is better to, even in the midst of the anger and the emotional dismay, to even if you're at risk of saying something inappropriate, you feel it's better to speak to each other as opposed to like taking time away and being quiet? Because I know, like, for myself, I have found that if I don't walk away, I have a terrible tendency to say disrespectful.
Well, see, the silent treatment I'm referring to is a chronic behavior. It's a chronic default way of handling conflict. Going to your separate corners when you are in intense disagreement is helpful. You need to collect your thoughts. You need to self-evaluate. You need to reflect. You need to process. That's healthy. Using silence as a way to punish your partner so that they are less than likely to bring up anything triggering to you or unsettling to you or something that you don't like, just to control their narrative. That's what I'm talking about. So instead of saying, hey, when we have this discussion, when you engage in this behavior, I feel these feelings. So they won't do that. The silent partner will shut down physically, intimately, sexually, and they will use that silence to punish or have the other person retreat away from their feelings, away from their thought processes, away from what they want to share.
Okay. So the one thing I'm thinking about is, what about people that, they come on too strong with their opinions and their feelings, and they kind of just get the other person even more upset? Is there a way that they can approach that in a better manner? Because sometimes they choose silence because otherwise it's just going to be a fight, and it could sometimes even get violent. So what would you recommend for people like that?
I would recommend for people who have trouble, write down points. You want to be as factual as possible. The reason why a lot of people argue, because they are arguing perceptions. And this is a subtle difference, right? Thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are three different things. And in rare occasions, they are one thing. But I can argue perception, right? If you say, I think this is I think you're being irrational. Or you're being irrational. Let's just say someone told you, you're being irrational. Well, I can argue that. That's a thought. You can argue any thought because that's your opinion. That's your perception. It's not rooted in fact. You are telling me how you perceive something. Well, I can say I perceive something differently. That is an arguable instance, right? I can say, well, my perception based on my experiences and how I see the world and my upbringing and who I am as a person has caused me to develop a different perception. That makes sense, right? What is not arguable is your feeling state. If you say, I feel hurt, well, then that's not an arguable state. And so when people come together, they are actually arguing perceptions, but what's tied to it is their feelings, right? Yeah. So, for example, someone says, you don't understand me, right? So the person will say, I do. That's a thought. I can clearly say, yes, I do. I do understand you. I understand you because I have done X, Y, and Z. I understand you because I know that your favorite color is red. I know that you like Haagen-Dazs a peanut butter pecan, mint chocolate chip. And I know that when your mother calls on this day, you know, when you get that look, that means you want to hang up. I understand you. So these are perceptions, right? And perceptions are allowed to vary. They are allowed to be different. Now, what's not being said when the person says you don't understand me is, I feel hurt. I feel lonely. I feel unseen. I'm wounded. Now that opens up a different conversation. And that's not a space in which I can challenge you because that's a subjective experience. Well, then, okay, then let's talk about that. But I can argue a thought, and it's a very, very fine line between the two. And that's where the fallout comes. You can't argue someone's feelings. I cannot argue if you are sad, hurt, you feel betrayal. Those are subjective feeling states. But if you want to argue what's outside of yourself and an objective reality, well, then, yes, that's fodder. We can disagree there.
So is it preferable to argue on the objective state, or do you want to go to the subjective? What should people push towards?
Yes, you can't argue someone's feelings. You can only allow them to express their feelings, and you can return in kind and express your feelings. But you can't correct someone's feelings. You cannot tell them that they don't feel that. You cannot tell them that it's unreasonable to feel that. You can't tell them that they should not feel that. You can't tell them that what they're feeling is not real. That's not for you, because those feelings exist inside of that person, and you have no access to what they feel. So you have no right, no capability, and you have no access.
Okay.
Love that. So for WokeNFree Nation listening, what are some recommendations that you have that the average person, regardless of the background, white, black, anything in between, can consume to help them work on being better communicators? Because in turn, or in essence, the better communicator someone is, the better, hopefully, relationships they have personally, but then also professionally. So do you have any tools or mantras or content recommendations that could help the average person, like just
follow my content. Follow my content on IG at Dr. LaShonda. That's one. A shameless plug. But my favorite mantra that I came up with, everyone's guilty in a relationship. Innocence is a legal term. In relationships, everyone's guilty. There are no innocent parties. So when people come and they're often complaining about the other person, we always start from, you're both guilty of something. You have to be. Wow. Why? Because there are no perfect people. You have to be guilty of something. You must be by default, because we are all a little bit broken. Some of us more than others. But but people are so committed to this sort of innocence and guilt. You know, we really are so dug in with those terms. But innocence and guilt, those are legal terms. Those are not actual words we use in everyday language. Guilt and innocence. So when people are, no, you're striving for guilt and innocence, and it doesn't exist. So now you're both on the same footing. So I would first start with, in a relationship, you're both guilty. You're both guilty because you're both a little bit broken. To what degree? You need to find it out with your therapist. But I always start with the frame, you both are guilty of something, right? Because innocence is clearly a legal term. It's not an actual thing. And write down, even if you have to text it, if you have to write it down or create a note in your app, when you are calm, sit and think about the points that you would like to make logically, not in the throes of being triggered, because you lose your objectivity, you use your rationality, you are triggered, you're likely projecting, you're likely not open, you can't really engage in a robust perspective taking. Sit down with a pen or paper, jot it in your app. It's called crystallization of thoughts. Brainstorm what you were thinking. Write it down and read it back to yourself out loud, right? Because hearing it in your head, writing it down and hearing it out loud are two different experiences. Yeah, so because when we rehearse these things, and we have no less than about 30,000 thoughts, right? So when we're having all of our thoughts, a lot of our thoughts make sense to us because they're ours. But if you were to sit down in a quiet space and write down the key points that you would like to communicate, say them out loud and actually feel what you're feeling, you may find that, is this a point that needs to be made? Like, is this even a valid point? Is this going to move the needle forward? Is this going to move the relationship forward? And then do a risk versus reward analysis. Okay, statement by statement. What would I risk in making this statement? How would the relationship be rewarded? Who's going to be rewarded and what would I risk? Point by point.
Wow.
Because per everything that comes out of your mouth, you are going to lose or gain something. You're going to move the relationship forward and move the intimacy forward, right? Or you're going to continue to widen those gaps that are already present in a relationship in terms of trust, reliability, consistency. I think the way that we attack interactional styles and communication and relationship functioning needs to be more formal. It needs to be more formal. We take for granted. We're too casual. We take it for granted each other's feelings. Oh, well, they should know, especially because somebody's Black. Just because somebody's Black doesn't mean you know them. You know their history. You know, we take this, oh, they're invited to the cookout. That's not true all the time. Just because somebody's Black doesn't mean you know them. You know their history. Take the time out to formally meet them, understand them, research them, learn them, know them, engage in perspective taking. It's not a given that just because you're Black, you're going to get me and I'm going to get you. That's not the case.
Wow.
Love that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So based on that, it sounds like, that people need to be a lot more strategic and a lot more intentional and maybe listen a little bit more than doing the talking to try to understand how to come correct us to people, because I've never even done that. And I find myself to be an overthinker and a methodical person, but I love that recommendation of a risk and reward assessment per statement you want to address. Cause that would really shut down the garbage. Cause if you're about to, you know what I mean? Like you're not, cause it's like, oh, there's no value for this. It's like,
because we have so many thoughts and because there's no way that every one of our thoughts are valuable. And it's okay because that's per every human being. So that's why it's really careful for this brainstorming exercise for you to tease through what's irrelevant and potentially detrimental, because it may feel good and it may possess for you some cathartic value. Well, then you may want to work through that thought on the treadmill versus in a conversation with your significant other. So that may be a thought you may want to have. You may want to work through privately. You may want to pick up a hobby. You may want to go to the gym. You may want to work out that thought with your therapist. But it's not all the thoughts that you have about your relationship should be brought up in your relationship. But you should, like you said, strategize. How is this going to affect the relationship? Is it going to move it forward? Am I going to create value? Am I going to create intimacy? Am I going to build trust? Is this going to create more safety? Because I've worked with men, and you know what I've discovered? Men have such a higher need for safety than women do in relationships.
Oh, okay.
And they don't articulate that. I do think it's because of a lack of self-awareness, maybe a lot of fear. But comparatively speaking, between the sexes, I would say that men have a greater need for safety. Hence why they're less apt to be vulnerable and open, because their requirement, their bar for needing that safe space is much higher. Women are not risk averse. We'll dive right in. We're like, oh, hey girl. And yes, I was a victim of DV 2 years ago. And like, we just met each other.
Okay.
And we share those intimate moments. We share those, I was a victim of this, or I heard this from my mom. We are more comfortable. We take the risk, and we take the risk to form the relationships. But men do not do that. So their bar for sharing that kind of information is so much higher. And so they have a higher need to feel safe. And it sounds like, wait, that doesn't sound, but that's the way it is. They absolutely do.
Yeah, I definitely feel you on that lack of self-awareness. We've talked about that before.
Yeah.
And I just say, I don't care much of that.
Pretty
about
much.
that. I'm not going to learn
He's
more
not
about
that
me.
life. Feelings are non-existent for him. So.
Yeah, you're definitely right about that.
Self-awareness is so hard. I mean, so when you hear a lot of men say, you don't understand, I don't talk to people, I don't share much. I don't talk about my feelings. So what they're not saying is, I typically don't feel safe. I typically don't feel safe enough to disclose what hurts me. I don't feel safe. It's hard to find safe spaces. I have very few safe spaces in my life. There are men who walk around, and even women who have no safe emotional space.
Wow.
That's incredible. Oh my goodness. Dr. Green, we could talk to you forever, but we know you have things to do and people to save and get their feelings right. Hello, what do you want to ask her?
Yeah, so I think, maybe you can speak to the WokeNFree Nation and actually let them know how can they support you.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Yes. Well, you can follow me on IG at Dr. LaShonda, DrLashonda. Yes, I have a little bit of everything. I haven't selected a particular niche. So right now I'm just throwing everything at the wall and see what sticks. I love a good process. I love it. Everybody's like, you've got to have a brand. What do you do? I don't know, but I'm in the process. I'm not mad. I'm not mad at the journey. People underestimate the value of the process. I like to hit my head and make a good mistake. There's so much learning to be done. So while I don't have a particular niche, I'm learning, I'm discovering, I'm becoming more self-aware about a lot of different things. And that in itself is very, that's what I value. So I'm on Facebook at Dr. LaShonda Green. I'm on TikTok. I'm trying my hand at that. And that's new. I'm a Gen Xer. I rep being a Gen X, okay? I didn't get my first email address to college. You know what I mean? So, so we're learning, my generation is still learning how to do this and how to make this work for us. So I'm in the throes of learning. So bear with me. I'm on Instagram. I'm trying to do my thing and make my way in the world like everybody else.
I love
Is that the best way they can reach you then? Is through Instagram?
The best way to reach me is on Instagram for sure. Yes.
Okay. Perfect.
Dr. LaShonda. Yes, that's the one. I'm not savvy where I'm in and out of all these social media sites. I'm like, give me one, please.
Gotcha. Well, we'll share your. I found you. I saw you on Facebook too, and
okay.
So I'll see your I'll look for your TikTok and make sure they have all your links and your website and stuff.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and then kind of, do you have any last words of wisdom for our listeners on kind of today's topic, or other type of things related to kind of what we talked about today?
Well, I do want to say that language is critical for healthy relationship functioning, and language is important for intimacy. How we show up verbally in our lives and in our interactions with other people should be more strategic and intentional, because words matter. How we deliver words matter. And the manner we choose them, it matters, right? So being better self-monitors of how we show up and comport ourselves in the relationship space is something we should commit ourselves to in terms of doing it better.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Green, for sharing your wisdom, your insight, and helping us all learn the art and the importance of effective communication, and really how it truly impacts our intimacy connections with others, especially our loved ones. We really appreciate you joining the show and coming on and hanging with us.
Yeah, thank you for those.
I appreciate it. I loved it. It was a good time.
Thank you. We are at that time again. It is coming to the end of our 273rd episode of WokeNFree. Okay, Yoda.
Oh no, that was not a Yoda sound.
I don't know what that disturbing noise was.
That was like a bird, I would say, like a blue jay.
From a different dimension of hell?
That's what you say about a blue jay. Okay, all right. I mean, blue jays speak a certain kind of intimacy with each other, so maybe that's what it would sound like. That could be what you're getting at. The language of the blue jays is different than what people would assume it is.
Lies.
No,
Lies.
You understand it's different.
This was quite the episode, discussing use of language and how it affects intimacy with Dr. LaShonda Green. Such an amazing guest, such amazing conversation. We can't wait to hear your thoughts in the comments. Please, please, please put them in. No comment should ever be ignored. Please, please, please share, share, share. Okay? Now,
should they comment on YouTube or not?
Oh, that's a great point, actually. Yeah, we would love, and so that's maybe, yeah, we'd love to have that clarification. So when we say comment, we mean put it in the episode through the Podbean app, but also, yeah, like on social media. If you listen on our YouTube, we would love your comments on YouTube. We've definitely enjoyed some of the comments so far, and we'd like to see more. So great call out, Khalil. Thank you.
All right, that's good to know.
What do folks need to do now?
They know what they need to do. They know they need to come back next week for the new WokeNFree Wednesday episode. They know they need to make sure they follow us on social media to follow along the conversation, and make sure they tune in next week for WokeNFree Wednesday to make sure they join the conversation at WokeNFree.com.
That was super direct. I love it, though. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, what you need to do is go to WokeNFree.com, go on our Contact Us page, and then that's where you can hit us up and share your story and why you feel your story needs to be shared with the WokeNFree Nation. So, looking forward to those submissions. In addition to that, said it earlier, say it again, we're very active on social. We'd love to hear your comments, your thoughts on all the platforms that you can see us at, which is on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Pinterest, and LinkedIn at WokeNFree. And for all sponsorship or collaboration queries, same page, contact us page at WokeNFree.com. That's WokeNFree.com.
If you didn't already subscribe, please do share the episode and make sure you come back to join the conversation every Wednesday for WokeNFree Wednesdays. Remember, WokeNFree is more than a podcast, it is a way of life. Until next time.